It was bold, it was mysterious, and it was kinda doomed from the start.
Released in 1995 with the power of 2 CPUs and the soul of an arcade monster, this is the Sega Saturn, a console that dared to fight the PlayStation head-on, only to be buried in marketing chaos, developer headaches, and one of the most confusing hardware designs of the 90s.
But was it really a failure? Or was it just too ahead of its time for our tiny Earth brains to understand?
Today we're deep diving into the console that gave us masterpieces like Nights in the Dreams, Panzer Dragoon, and a whole bunch of Japanese exclusives you probably never even knew existed. We're going to talk games, hardware, legacy, and why this box of mystery still haunts retro gamers to this day.
Our story starts in 1992 where the Sega Mega Drive aka the Sega Genesis wasn't performing as well as its counterparts the Super Famicom aka the Super Nintendo and the PC Engine aka the TurboGrafx-16. While Sega of America was swimming in cash through the success of their Genesis, Sega of Japan was in the middle of a crisis where they were losing all their money to Nintendo. So right when Sega got the idea of striking back with a new console to rival the Super Nintendo, oh boy, they went straight to work on it. The Sega Saturn was composed of 2 CPUs and get this, 8 processors. While during development the Saturn was supposed to have only 1 CPU meant for 2D software, when the Sony PlayStation 1 was teased and praised for its 3D polygon technology, Sega decided rather than adding to that 1 CPU to just create another one to support 3D graphics, since the addition of 3D came at a late time in the console's production. In Japan, the Sega Saturn was released in November 22nd, 1994. They chose this day to, of course, beat the PlayStation 1 to market. But this worked somehow, and Sega sold 500,000 consoles while Sony only sold 300,000 consoles. Back in America, Sega had just released another console in that region, the Sega 32X, a console meant to rival the Panasonic 3DO and Atari Jaguar, 2 consoles that were, let's say, more successful outside of Japan. However, this was awful since Sega of Japan had ordered for the Sega Saturn to be released outside of Japan to compete with the PS1 when it also released outside of Japan. However, the Sega 32X had just released, meaning that the console would be overshadowed by the Saturn when it was announced, and also the 2 consoles that released too close to each other would lead to competition in their own market, essentially causing confusion and leading for more consumers to either wait for the PS1 or just buy a Super Nintendo. However, it went worse when Sega of Japan had then ordered for the Saturn's US release date to be forwarded from September to May of that same year. Now the market would be even worse and people would be dragged away from Sega due to the absurd number of consoles available in the market and then just buy from their competitors.
Now we go over the most important aspect of this bad boy, the games. There are a ton of games, especially games that released in Japan. However, I have selected 4 titles that really make this system the Sega Saturn. And of course, because I'm not like any other creator, I had to record my gameplay on a VHS tape because I'm BENEPATHOS and I love recording things on old things. If that makes sense. Now, let's appreciate these 4 Saturn titles of wonder. And hit the play button.
In July of 1996, Sonic Team, known for making the fantastic Blue Hedgehog himself, delivered a game that is kind of the flagship title of the console, meaning you won't be introduced to the Saturn without this title being brought up at some point. In this title called Nights in the Dreams, you play as 2 teenagers, a girl named Clarice and a boy named Elliot. In their campaigns, they meet and duelize with Knights, a non-binary jester with a bit of mischief and disobedience in them. When your character duelizes with them, your bodies kind of meet together, and once you duelize, you will begin to control Knights. The goal of the game is fun, meanwhile incredibly simple. The player has to fly through rings, get chips, go through 4 rounds unlocking and collecting an orb known as Eerie each round by using the chips you obtain. You then must return the Eerie you've captured to the beginning hub. It will make a lot more sense once you play it. This magical game was the game on the Sega Saturn and is one of the most important titles in the Saturn's vast collection of games. If you are beginning to collect for the Saturn, I recommend playing this title first as it is a showcase of the console's 3D capabilities. With incredibly responsive controls and a fun objective, you will be bouncing with excitement and joy by the time the experience ends. If you want to get this title and play it on an original Saturn, I recommend getting the Saturn 3D pad since the game controls the best with that controller. In the end, this joyous title is a game that brings magic and dreams into the living room. I will tell you that I do not regret getting this title, and I am very grateful I was able to obtain this. In 1995, Sega AM2, known for some fantastic arcade games, ported the popular arcade title Daytona USA over to the Sega Saturn. This title is yet another showcase of the Sega Saturn's 3D hardware. Though less impressive than Knights, is still a fantastic port to living rooms. In this game, you are able to select between 3 levels of difficulty: beginner, advanced, and expert. In this racing masterpiece, you race against computer bots to reach the first position. You can crash, bump into any other cars. It's just a fun experience that, while isn't the best, it is a wonderful port of a wonderful game. If you are beginning to collect for the Sega Saturn, I recommend you skip this title only if you are not experienced in Sega's arcade library or are not into the Sega AM2 games. If you are experienced in either, I recommend you get this title since it'll bring you back to the arcades. In 1997, Sonic Team, known for creating Knights the year before, decided to create a new Sonic game for the system due to the lack of Sonic games on the console. They named this game Sonic Jam. You may think this is a brand new title with new levels, but it is simply a collection of all the old Genesis games but updated, and a new 3D tech demo of how Sonic would look on the Saturn if he received the proper title on the darn thing. The games include Sonic 1, 2, 3, and Knuckles, and it also includes a little Sonic history like commercials for previous games and other media. If you are collecting for the Sega Saturn, I advise you get this title only if you are a Sonic fan, but also beware of the expensive prices the game can go for. What I do is simply burn the game to a CD and then use an action replay card to play the game. Most Saturn games are available to download online, so just use a CD burner, get an action replay card, and you're set. In the end, coming back to this title, I believe it is a massive representation of Sonic and Friends on Sega's 32-bit powerhouse, and it is a very polished collection with fancy menus and a generally good interface. In the end, this title showed what Sonic could have been. In the same year as Sonic Jam, Sonic R was created, this time created by a company called Traveler's Tales, known for their work on the LEGO games. In this game, you play as Sonic and pals and race till you can't anymore. In total, there are 5 maps with unique tracks and layouts, which make the game feel fresh. In every level, there is 5 bonus coins and 1 to 2 Chaos Emeralds depending on the map. If you find all the 5 bonus coins in each level, you can race the respective boss for that map. If you beat the boss and unlock that respective character, you will be able to race as them. If you receive all the 7 Chaos Emeralds in the game's maps, you will be able to race as Super Sonic. And you won't have to worry about the rings, because unlike in the main games, in this game, Super Sonic is a separate character. One bad thing about this game is the controls. Like for Knights, I recommend you use the Saturn 3D pad for this one since it's heavily better to control with. You can control by either holding the B button to go forward or just move the joystick forward. I prefer using the B button using the joystick to turn, but I know some people would prefer to use it the other way. The L and R buttons are to drift left and right, and the C button can be used to jump. Like Sonic Jam, this game is also pretty expensive for the original copy, but there are workarounds to this issue. In the end, this game had a banger of a soundtrack and nice selection of maps, but was cursed with horrible controls and was left to rot on the Sega Saturn during its final days. It was ported to PC, and it is a generally better version with better controls, but if you are collecting for the Saturn and stumble upon an affordable copy of the game, or even decide to burn it, go ahead, as it is a nice game to put your Saturn to work.
So now we should go over what happened to the Sega Saturn in the end. So the Sega Saturn in total ended up selling 9 million units compared to the Nintendo 64, which sold 32 million units, and the PlayStation, which sold 102 million units. Now, the reason why this was due to a lack of games, a lack of humongous games that people knew and loved, and also the expensive price that the Saturn was going for compared to the PlayStation, and also its surprise launch in North America when it was released in May instead of September, as it was promised. The Sega Saturn is a very beautiful console with a beautiful lineup of games. However, it just ended up paling in comparison to the PlayStation's humongous games. So the Sega Saturn ended up being one of the reasons why Sega had to end up leaving the console business after the Sega Dreamcast, because they had ran out of money and they could not further support the Dreamcast. It is very unfortunate because I believe Sega had a very bright future, and if this system could have had at least a mainline Sonic title, or at least something, a killer app that would have made this console stronger and would have made this console better and would have made this console more successful, I believe it would have helped Sega in the long run. So that was my review of the Sega Saturn. Thank you to all of my supporters, my Patreon and YouTube members, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.